You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Hello, I'm Connor,
And I'm Alex.
and we're talking Star Wars. Today we're going to be returning to the subject of what ifs, the notion of taking one small change in one of the Star Wars films, and then sort of teasing out what the rest of the story would divert into from there. And last week we talked about the original trilogy, and this week we're going to talk about the prequel films. And I think the last time we spoke, I uh, started first with episode six. So for your episode one take, what element would you change?
And for our listeners, just note that Connor and I have not compared notes
Mhm.
beforehand, as with the previous episode. So this is as surprising to each other as it is to all of you. So going first, episode one, The Phantom Menace. The first film released after Return of the Jedi capped off George Lucas's original trilogy and introduced us to such figures as Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul, released in 1999. So my what if for episode one, The Phantom Menace, is what if Obi-Wan died and Qui-Gon Jinn survived to train Anakin?
Yes. That's a good change because I once heard Dave Filoni describe that the popular battle theme Duel of the Fates is in a way referring to uh, this fight for holding Anakin's fate in the balance. So if Qui-Gon Jinn falls, as we see, Anakin is taken on as a Padawan by Obi-Wan Kenobi. If Obi-Wan Kenobi falls, he's taken on as a Padawan by Qui-Gon. Uh, if Maul falls, there might be no change. Um, Obi-Wan might still be a student of Qui-Gon, or he could be a student of Anakin. So, in your view, how would the rest of the series fare if Qui-Gon Jinn were to remain alive and become master to Anakin?
Well, Qui-Gon Jinn's survival impacts more than just him training Anakin, because he was also a maverick to the Jedi Council and would be one of the key people who would be very suspicious of Palpatine's motivations. He was one of those figures that Palpatine wanted to get out of the way anyway. Uh, Qui-Gon Jinn was in fact the Padawan of his later apprentice, Darth Tyrannus, Count Dooku. So Jinn would have also had a great knowledge of one of the key members of the Separatist coalition that Palpatine put together.
Mhm.
So Qui-Gon surviving has far-reaching impacts to the whole setting. I think that he has almost, if not a fatherly, then like a much more direct mentor to student relationship with Anakin. I think he was more flexible than Obi-Wan was able to be. Obi-Wan had to step up and grow up very quickly to train Anakin. And they never quite meshed well as master and apprentice.
Mhm.
It is particularly notable, especially in books such as Brotherhood, that the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin improves dramatically after Anakin is knighted and they find their new equilibrium together. But this still leaves Anakin having been knighted too quickly without all of the coping skills he needs to deal with his various traumas, his emotions, his upbringing, and all that. And Obi-Wan loves him dearly like a brother, helps him as much as he can, but is not equipped with the same flexibility that Qui-Gon Jinn would have to guide him through those nuanced situations.
Mhm. Do you think that Qui-Gon would have been able to help Anakin avoid attachment, uh, like Obi-Wan couldn't, or do you think that Anakin would still fall to the trap of love and marry Padme?
I don't think Qui-Gon Jinn would have stayed quiet because Obi-Wan definitely knew eventually that Anakin and Padme had something going on. He didn't say anything, and I don't think he knew that they were married, or certainly didn't uh, know that the depth of what they had going on. But I think Qui-Gon Jinn would have said something early, as we see in the High Republic and other eras. It was one of the jobs of a Jedi Master to have those uncomfortable puberty-esque birds and bees conversations with their Padawans.
Mhm.
It's like a rite of passage, and I don't think Obi-Wan felt like he was ever in a position to do that with Anakin due to this closeness of their ages and Anakin's obvious troubles in other areas. I think Qui-Gon would have confronted him about it. It's like, okay, you obviously have an attachment to Senator Organa. Let's talk about it.
Hmm.
Do you want to stay with the Order? Do you not? I understand you wanting to leave the Order. I almost did it myself. Well, tell me what's going on. So I think Qui-Gon Jinn would have risked more in his relationship with Anakin and also gotten more in return.
Hmm.
I think this also paints a bigger target on Qui-Gon Jinn's back, in the same way that the prophetic Sifo Dyas could not be allowed to live for Palpatine to rise to power, why Palpatine had to use his Sith powers to cloud the vision of the Jedi Council. I think Qui-Gon Jinn gets a target on his back early in Palpatine's attempt to rise to power. Qui-Gon
Hmm.
Jinn would not have eagerly or openly supported the war or the Jedi becoming generals. He would have been very suspicious of Palpatine. So I think Qui-Gon Jinn gets a target on his back very early in this case.
Yeah, because he's not exactly a rogue, but he is a maverick. He makes his own decisions and lets the consequences be damned. So seeing him not fall in line with Palpatine and what the Republic is asking for the sake of the living force, I think is quite realistic. And uh, moving on into what happens with the characters in Episode 3, I'm curious whether Palpatine would still rise to power. Uh, would Qui-Gon Jinn be able to prevent that, or would he too be unable to stop the Dark Master?
So I think Qui-Gon Jinn, if forced to fight Anakin, but I don't think it comes to that between Qui-Gon
Hmm.
Jinn and Anakin. I don't think Palpatine is as successful seducing Anakin away with Qui-Gon Jinn as his master. So I think Palpatine too is intelligent. He takes a new tack. He would maybe attempt to kill Qui-Gon Jinn. He would maybe attempt to discredit Qui-Gon for having been the Padawan of Count Dooku. He would attempt to sideline Qui-Gon Jinn and separate and drive division between Jinn and Anakin. Or if Anakin is loyal to Qui-Gon Jinn, because Anakin does manage fierce loyalty, and I can certainly see him having Jin as his father figure. If that happens, then Palpatine pivots. Anakin no longer is part of his plans. And then is Qui Gon insightful enough to help avert Order 66? I don't know.
Hmm.
Does I think Qui Gon Jinn would argue against letting Anakin have a Padawan in the form of Ahsoka. Ahsoka probably then goes to a different master,
Hmm.
removing a actually mitigating instinct, but maybe Anakin doesn't need that anymore. I think Anakin remains a war hero, but tempered more by Qui Gon Jinn. And then
Hmm.
I think Jin and Anakin both die in Order 66.
So again, it's a future that might be positive at one point, but it still doesn't have the best possible outcome for the characters ultimately.
Yeah. And it's hard to see through all of the possible options, but I think the biggest impact would be Qui-Gon Jinn as a not if not pacifistic, a moderating influence in the Jedi Council, being an influential and uh, non-standard Jedi,
Hmm.
and having Anakin have a much more stable and older figure to train him, who will tackle more difficult questions with the tools of a life lived to help him through things like attachment, love, loss, grief.
Hmm. I could certainly see where uh, when Obi-Wan Kenobi chastises Anakin, there's quite a bit of attitude behind it. I think that, you'd still have Qui-Gon Jinn chastising Anakin, but his approach is much more direct and mannered. There's not a lot of attitude behind it. Anakin wouldn't be so afraid to communicate his feelings and fears with Qui-Gon.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is my what if for episode one. Qui-Gon Jinn
Gotcha.
training Anakin. Maybe it works out better, maybe it doesn't, but certainly has a profound influence on both Anakin and the Jedi Council.
Hmm. Well, interesting. So my take for the film uh, was, what if Anakin never makes it off Tatooine? Or I should say, what if Qui-Gon Jinn never saves Anakin from Tatooine? I think that the rest of the
So
film would play out strikingly similar, except for the fact that Anakin's not there to help detonate the Separatist Trade Federation. I'm sorry, to detonate the Trade Federation blockade ship. So there may be a little bit of a lack of success there, but I still think that we have uh, Qui-Gon Jinn falling at the hands of Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi almost slaying Maul. But the one ramification I would see here is that Maul would remember the child on Tatooine. He would remember how the child was able to duck out of the way of his attack, almost as if he could sense it. Uh, and I would say that Anakin, with no master, with dreams of becoming a Jedi, uh, Anakin becomes easily swayed by Maul and becomes Maul's new apprentice at this point.
I I don't see so in my if I would take your what if in that perhaps they never even visit Tatooine.
Hmm.
So let's take it there. Let's say that when they pick a different planet, they never land there. So
Hmm.
Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan never meet the Chosen One. So Anakin, unnoticed by all, remains a slave, maybe eventually probably freeing himself, and his mother on Tatooine, as a young adult. So how does unnoticed, force sensitive, immaculately concepted Anakin fare on Tatooine? I mean, we even saw that Ventress being force sensitive on a far off planet attracted the attention of Count Dooku.
Hmm.
I think that Anakin then more directly becomes Maul's replacement. I think Palpatine feels his presence in the Force and just directly recruits him. And then
Sure.
Anakin becomes the secret apprentice in the shadows, not being raised as a Jedi, but instead being the Sith assassin and eventual, maybe even becoming Darth Vader, but without the intervening step of having been General Anakin Skywalker or Jedi
Hmm.
Knight Anakin Skywalker. He just skips right to Darth Vader, um, or whatever Darth name he is given.
Hmm.
His powers remain the same, or at least to the same degree. Steeped deep in Sith mysteries, we know that he still remains traumatized by his childhood upbringing, hates slavery, suspicious of power, and I can see
Hmm.
Palpatine finding all of those levers in Anakin's psyche and turning him more directly into a weapon. I think Palpatine loses a lot of what makes Anakin powerful by sequestering him in that way.
Hmm.
But Palpatine never wanted a rival; he wanted a weapon, and so Anakin then becomes a weapon that he points at. And I think in the same way that eventually um, Dooku dies, Maul dies, he just unleashes his secret Sith weapon during Order 66, and then this more brutal, less worldly, more dogmatic Sith apprentice of Palpatine just takes his place at his side. That's one interpretation. The other
Hmm.
one is that like other potential chosen ones or like other things have happened. Anakin Skywalker becomes a renowned pilot, a force sensitive wildcat,
Smuggler
um,
type.
yeah, on the Outer Rim, never gets the attention of anyone, eventually, or dies young in an accident, or is eventually good enough, marries, has children, and dies in obscurity without ever having made a galactic impact at all. And the world
Hmm.
just passes on without him.
I think out of those two takes, I would for sure see the first one, just because Anakin is still going to be incredibly powerful. He's still going to have talents, and if he is that powerful, uh, Palpatine will surely find him some way. Uh, I see a possible future where instead of being trained by Anakin, Ahsoka becomes Obi-Wan Kenobi's apprentice at the start of the Clone Wars, if the Clone Wars still are to occur, which I think they would because they were set in motion around the same time. So I think that Anakin, being as talented as he is and as ambitious as he is, whether he, intervened with Qui-Gon Jinn and Padme or not, um, he would still have that potential that would be sought out and um, taken advantage of. So in this case, if we have, Anakin, who's this, uh, really he becomes a more, if only uh, the light side could have taught him this. He doesn't really have any attachments uh, as a servant of the dark side, and therefore might be more powerful, might be more of a pure menace that at this point Ahsoka and Kenobi may not be able to overcome. So this is you want your bad guy Vader movie. This is the darkest, most violent future. I think I've said that several times now, but yeah, with Anakin. fully entrenched in the dark side, the galaxy would surely be a more frightening place.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's my take. If Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan land the Queen of Naboo's freighter on Ryloth or some other planet and never end up in Tatooine, then instead, I think the battle on Naboo ends up bloodier, as you said, because the control ship remains is eventually overcome, but the loss among the Gungans are much more severe. Maybe it makes relationships with the Gungans more strained, but I think the
Mhm.
primary difference is in the presence of Anakin Skywalker on the galactic stage.
Right. So quite frightening. Then, if we move on to episode two, so this one is very similar, and it harkens back to what I was saying before, where there are so many moments where Anakin could turn, where Anakin could be tempted by the dark side. And I thought for this one, instead of going to Naboo, what if it was Anakin who was sent on a mission to investigate Camino and the cloning facility?
All right, so episode two, Attack of the Clones. This is what if Obi-Wan and Anakin's missions were reversed, where recognizing that Anakin is emotionally compromised, they send Obi-Wan to guard the head of state as he has done before, and they send Anakin, bright young Jedi, on an independent mission to investigate the cloning facilities on Camino.
Exactly. So the way that I see this following from there, Kenobi and Padme have a fairly successful, uneventful trip because, as we see with Anakin, the only way that his story got dramatic was by having visions of his mother being in danger. So that forced him and Padme to take the trip from Naboo to Tatooine. So if we have an Anakin who's all alone, we have him finding his way to Camino, doing all the investigative footwork prior to that. And I think that his path would cross Dooku's quite similarly to how Kenobi did. And I don't know if Anakin would be able to avoid overcoming temptation from Dooku because we have someone who's very charismatic, someone who is incredibly manipulative in the form of Dooku, and we have a version of Anakin who may feel, uh, you know, just what's the word? I got chided in mind, but that's not it. He might not be too happy with the fact that he has these burgeoning feelings for Padme, and the council saw through him and decided to separate the two. So he might be in an extra vulnerable spot. Plus, he's having these dreams about his mother that he can't go and do anything about because he's on an investigative journey and is captured. So, yeah, I would say that uh, quite similar to last, he falls to the dark side early and perhaps becomes Dooku's apprentice, allowing them to overcome Palpatine.
So I take this the exact sequence of events a little bit differently, but I think
Hmm.
it definitely changes. So I see an Anakin by himself being sent to Camino is still tormented by the same visions of his mother. And so this is a more violent a he's already dealing with his feelings with Padme. He is upset that he is not trusted by the Jedi Council. He recognizes what is going on, so he's resentful that Obi-Wan gets to spend time with Padme. He recognizes that all these emotions are wrong, but still struggles with them. So, but he does his duty. He still goes to Camino. And Anakin is, well, much less subtle than Obi-Wan, is not unintelligent.
Hmm.
So he is much more technically inclined. So I can see him slicing into the mainframes in Camino, learning about the cloning templates, getting the tour of all that. But I think as soon as he finds Django, rather than having a polite interaction, out comes the lightsaber immediately. And
Hmm.
so there is a much more violent, brutal collateral damage fight happening on Camino. Anakin still being tormented by visions of his mother, perhaps even would think about hurting Boba, but then can't bring himself to hurt a child with a father figure there. Um, does not think to put a tracker, or perhaps he probably still puts a tracker on Django's ship, but
Hmm.
he needs to his own ship, and there's a dogfight instead. Anakin is a much better pilot than Obi-Wan is,
Hmm.
but
I was gonna say, yeah, Anakin's not going to be pursued by Boba Fett. He is going to be the one making chase.
Yeah, so I see the way that Django escapes in this is because Anakin is tormented by visions of his mother and by visions of Padme with Obi-Wan. So he is about to defeat Django in a dogfight above Camino when he has a vision that almost incapacitates him, manages to launch a tracker again at Django's ship, and Django escapes with a tracker on it. But
Mhm.
rather than directly pursuing, as Obi-Wan did, Anakin, finally overcome, then himself goes to Tatooine to find his mother.
Mhm.
Um, just on his Jedi starfighter alone, goes rogue, goes AWOL, goes to find his mother. Doesn't have the cover of Padme making a decision about going somewhere. Just goes AWOL and leaves, leaving where Obi-Wan and Padme are then just kind of chilling on Naboo. No assassins go after them, but then learns from Anakin's last transmission that the assassin that tried to kill her, he put a tracker on her ship and goes to the planet of Geonosis. And Padme makes the same decision instead of going to investigate uh, Anakin's mother, goes to Geonosis instead. Obi-Wan comes, but as well, and then the same thing. Yoda goes to investigate the cloning facilities on Camino. But the
Mhm.
key difference here is then Anakin arrives late, having slaughtered all the Sand People without Padme's influence. And so I agree with you. He then falls. He becomes um, he falls harder. Obi-Wan and Padme are obviously captured. Anakin comes in late, and I see him being tempted by Dooku, and perhaps even if Dooku at that stage does not convince him to turn, we get a Anakin who falls earlier, falls harder, and we don't have the time for Anakin and Padme to become romantically entangled. And so
Mhm.
rather than that lever being it is the rage about his mother's death, and that becomes the trigger for Anakin maybe stepping into the role that Ventress has. Um,
Yeah. And I see him perhaps
or
not.
maybe even being kicked out of the
Mhm.
Jedi Order because him going
Yeah.
AWOL in the middle of this mission. I can see him just
Oh, for
being
sure.
thrown out of the Jedi Order and Dooku swooping in and recruiting him.
Yeah, and it would come right from his attachment for his mother, and maybe not having the shame about it because Padme is not there to make him feel embarrassed like he did something wrong. He could feel justified, but I think that we're going to end up with an Anakin. You bring up the term levers. He's not going to have the lever of his relationship and his love, and I think that is what uh, acts as the crucible for Palpatine to turn him into Vader. It's, it's the loss of his mother. It's the threat of the loss of his love, of his child, of his rank. He doesn't have so much of that if he turns early. So he may turn into an acolyte assassin figure like Ventress as an enemy in the Clone Wars, but I don't think we're going to get the same uh, for lack of a better term, effective, successful Darth Vader. He's not going to have that same kind of ambition and fear.
I think his ambition all turns towards power then, and I
Mhm.
see him Palpatine encouraging that, and he then slays Dooku to take his place as Palpatine's apprentice.
Mhm.
Or Palpatine gives Dooku the same order he gives him about Ventress: kill your assassin. But then Anakin not only survives but kills Dooku in response, and then either is rivals with Palpatine or again joins as Palpatine's apprentice.
Mhm.
I think I like there's lots that's changed in all these, but I think we kept coming back to the way in which Palpatine arranges things and the way in which Anakin is the chosen one. Most universes and versions that we're seeing still end up with Anakin in some way being Palpatine's apprentice.
Mhm. Yeah, he's fated to that. Um, so I guess in that case, what would be your suggested change for episode two?
All right, for me, episode two, Attack of the Clones, our second what if scenario would be what if Padme and Obi-Wan fell in love instead of Anakin and Padme?
Ooh. So
So
would we
we
still
are,
be kind of in the same situation where it's Obi-Wan and it is Padme who go to Naboo together, or are we joining their characters in some other way?
yeah, so we're going to keep everything else the same, except it is, we already know that Obi-Wan is a inner romantic. He had a thing for Satine, another head of state, when he guarded her as a Padawan. And let's say in The Phantom Menace, we have, the childhood crush by Anakin, but Padme, it's whatever. But then, this dashing Jedi Knight who then killed one of the assassins who tried to kill me, helped save me from the separatist cause. They then bond over Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral and stay in touch over time. And then they suddenly reconnect, you know,
Mhm.
a decade later when Obi-Wan is now a full knight, successfully raising his rather fraught Padawan. Anakin and Padme are fast friends. He still carved the trinket for her, but there's no
Mhm.
romantic inclination there. But instead, all the romantic inclination is then from Obi-Wan, who is um, feels so under so much pressure being a young Jedi Knight. He's got this apprentice who may or may not be the chosen one. He's trying to fill Qui-Gon Jinn's shoes. He desperately misses Satine, who he once was going to leave the Jedi Order for. And here is this slightly younger than him, but vibrant and bright senator fighting for the cause of truth and justice, who appears to be reciprocating his feelings. So if that happens, so I mean, there's two versions of it. One where Anakin is also in love with Padme and they compete for her affections, and one
Mhm.
where Padme and Anakin are friends, but all the romantic inclination is from Obi-Wan.
I think if we take a look at this scenario, I mean, it can fit right alongside mine where Anakin goes to Camino instead of Naboo. So I think that his arc could remain where he falls victim to the dark side early. But our discussion left out what happens with Padme and Kenobi. So say they start a romance, have to harbor it in secret during the Clone Wars. You have Kenobi who uh, mentors Ahsoka Tano, perhaps, because I think that's just kind of the natural next step if Anakin's not there. Do they have kids? Does Kenobi fall that far that he, um, you know, uh, goes the route of, oh, we made a Luke and Leia of our own?
So I see Obi-Wan leaving the Jedi Order, whether this happens. I do not, and that's an option that Anakin always had, but couldn't quite entertain. But I
Hmm.
see Obi-Wan when, if and when he gets Padme pregnant, they're in love. I see him then saying, "Okay, I need to leave the Jedi Order. I am choosing you over the Order." And maybe he even plans to do it. And maybe the war is the only thing holding him back. He's like, I must remain General Kenobi for now. But my
Hmm.
plan after the war is to then leave and be with you. People will despise me, but hey, this is Naboo. People won't care on Naboo. So we'll just go and raise our children in the Lake Country. And Satine at this point, I can see some parts of the arcs of the Clone Wars being significantly different, with Obi-Wan's
Hmm.
new flame being there, with Duchess Satine. Obi-Wan still treating her like an old friend, but then there's, they're all mature adults. So I don't foresee there being any juvenile romantic triangles going on, but certainly a different dynamic present there, with Satine recognizing that Obi-Wan has a type.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I could see them having children together, and that becomes Obi-Wan is never going to become Palpatine's apprentice. He might leave
No.
the Order and all that, but I think Anakin, with his mother's death, can still be tempted by Palpatine, but without, again, the what lever then does Palpatine have over Anakin? I think
Hmm.
then the brutality of the war hero, and then I think then does Anakin probably does he have like other flings and all that, and then does Palpatine destroy Anakin's trust in the Order through the lens of Obi-Wan has had this secret wife the whole time and
Hmm.
never trusted
Ooh.
you. And so does he turn Anakin against Obi-Wan in that way?
Hmm.
Uh, or does Anakin remain with the Jedi Order and they drive Obi-Wan away, and then Anakin falls with everyone else during Order 66? Leaving Obi-Wan is again a desperate survivor, his wife dead, his children missing. There's a lot of options here, but just the
Yeah.
tragic romance between him and Padme, and I can definitely see why Padme would fall in love with Obi-Wan.
Hmm.
Um, in the same way Sabine did. He's honorable, just,
Oh
powerful.
yeah. Charismatic.
Um, yeah,
I could see
well,
if Kenobi leaves the Order, he's not going to be an inactive citizen. He is definitely going to be at the forefront of forming a rebellion, just as Padme was. And without having a homicidal sociopath as a husband, she will likely survive after the end of the Clone War. And I think that if Anakin does, you know, continue as a dark side puppet, or if he is, uh, Sloon, whichever,
Lane.
slain. There we go. Uh, in any case, I can still see Padme, Kenobi, their children, all being members of the rebellion and serving to just free the galaxy. Because even if Kenobi is not a Jedi, he's still a good person uh, in any extent. So I think that this isn't our most hopeless universe. We still have a hope in uh, Kenobi. He
Yeah,
becomes the new hope in this case.
yeah, because I think the Anakin and Padme's relationship was incredibly toxic. In
Mhm.
a different circumstance, they could have had a positive relationship, and there were many positive aspects to their relationship. But if that is removed from Anakin's cares, I think he has more bandwidth in his emotional life to deal with other issues. Yeah,
Mhm.
but I think then the relationship with Obi-Wan is permanently damaged, which I think becomes the lever that Palpatine then uses to make him his apprentice. And then, but I think we have Padme surviving childbirth in Order 66. Ex-Jedi Obi-Wan, who left the Order in the middle of the Clone Wars, helps her
Mhm.
survive, and they become the founding members of the Rebel Alliance. And it is their children who then are force sensitive and are raised in that way. Well, Anakin is still hunting down his old master, um, and that becomes the prime antagonist, not just searching for his son, but his old master and this new Jedi Order that they're worried Obi-Wan might establish.
Mhm.
So yeah, that is my what if for episode two. A deep, healthier relation and romance, but still forbidden between Padme and Obi-Wan, where
Mhm.
eventually Obi-Wan cannot hide it because he is too honorable. He leaves the Jedi Order, and that has huge implications for Order 66 and beyond.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. It makes for uh just the flip side of the coin as far as the story goes. So yeah, I out of all the ones we've talked about, I hope Disney is listening so that they can adapt this one because I'd be very intrigued to see the designs and just the direction of this. Um, so yes,
So
are we ready for episode three?
yeah, I believe it is my turn to go first for episode three here.
Hmm.
So, episode three, Revenge of the Sith. Um, so my what if is, what if Yoda defeated Palpatine, but Anakin defeated Obi-Wan?
Ooh, ooh.
So the two linchpin finales of the finale. So everything else happens the same. You know, Anakin is still on the cusp of the dark side. He has still become Darth Vader. He has slaughtered all the separatists. Yoda and Obi-Wan still find the recording. All the rest happens as well. Padme still is going to bear children and perhaps die. Whatever else happens. But in our final confrontation, Emperor Palpatine fights against the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, Grandmaster Yoda, and is defeated. And Yoda does not hesitate, the same way that Palpatine wasn't. Yoda kills Palpatine. I do
Hmm.
not foresee an area where Yoda at this point would allow Palpatine to live. He
Right.
is a Sith Lord. He is far too powerful. So, in the Senate floor, in witnesses, the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, who Palpatine has been portraying as having turned on the Republic, murders the Supreme Chancellor, or kills the Supreme Chancellor. It's portrayed as murder later, in sight of news droids and clones and politicians.
Hmm.
And on the flip side, on Mustafar, we have Obi-Wan and Anakin's duel. Anakin seizes the high guard. Obi-Wan attempts to go, and Anakin slashes him through the heart. And I do not see a dark side Anakin allowing Obi-Wan to live either. So instead of having four people who live, where Palpatine is not able to entirely overcome Yoda and Yoda flees, instead Yoda overcomes and kills Palpatine, but then Anakin overcomes and kills Obi-Wan.
So my first question is, what's the state of the galaxy's opinion of Jedi at this moment? Because this would be after Palpatine's speech to the Senate. This would be after Order 66. Uh, so how does the galaxy feel with Palpatine dead at the hands of a Jedi?
I think that is the crown jewel then on his um, propaganda victory.
Hmm.
So he himself would not have wanted to die, and he doesn't have any of his cloning apparatus in place yet. So Palpatine is permanently dead at this point. Did
Hmm.
not foresee losing to Yoda. Yoda is still alive, but it's now really one of the only remaining Jedi. We know there's a handful of others that survived Order 66. Cal
Hmm.
Kestis is out there. Karen Malicos, a few others, and Yoda, not having been defeated, maybe maintains more hope for the future and might rally some of those Jedi, but they are still hunted fugitives.
Hmm.
Palpatine is no longer there to pull the strings, but all the clones have been triggered, have had Order 66 triggered. They are slavishly loyal for a period of time to the Empire, ruthlessly carrying out the will. And so, with a power vacuum of Palpatine at the top, Anakin has already been elevated to the position of Darth Vader. He was General Skywalker. So I still see Anakin has already killed Dooku. The Separatists are all dead. Does
Hmm.
Anakin step into the throne? Does Tarkin step into the throne? Anakin and Tarkin are already allies at this point.
Yeah,
So I see. I'm trying to imagine is it's Anakin able to become Emperor Skywalker,
I think
or
so. I think that
does he become
he,
Emperor Vader? Does he
yeah,
hide his former Jedi identity deliberately still?
I believe so. I think at this point he's already been christened as Darth Vader. He has no one stopping him because there's no Kenobi, there's no Palpatine. He is no one's puppet any longer. We've lost Padme. Uh, we
Which he
have
blames
to,
Obi-Wan, which he blames Obi-Wan for, but has killed Obi-Wan. So he
right.
has to then take. I think he delves into the deepest wells of Sith science and magic that he
Hmm.
can to try to bring Padme back to life. That
Oh yeah,
becomes his obsession. All of the
unhindered.
cloning resources, all of that. Without Obi-Wan there, and without, I think, does he discover his own children again? That would give Anakin a reason to seize power and protect them.
Hmm.
As if without being defeated by Obi-Wan, I think he Padme is still then there on Mustafar. Does Padme survive? Or
Hmm.
does she still die in childbirth without Palpatine deciphering her life force?
Right, because we do have her still on the ship. She was going to leave with Kenobi, so maybe at this point, Anakin prevents her from dying. If he's able to force choke her, maybe he's able to uh, force will her to stay alive if she's, right there within contact with him. Doesn't have Palpatine pulling from her life force. Uh, so I think he unfortunately retains his children and becomes a pretty awful dad. We're in a pretty scary situation where Anakin has access to Padme. Even if she doesn't survive, he still has access to his kids, and he has wanted power. He has wanted to become the Emperor and take down Palpatine, and now he doesn't have to.
Yeah,
So
my new empire, what he calls it, Obi-Wan, and I think he makes that a reality. He does not have
yes.
any of Palpatine's political deftness, but he has far more brutal power to bring to bear. The 501st apparently immediately still becomes Vader's fist to seize power with him.
Mhm.
Tarkin becomes an ally early. He gives Tarkin a great deal of power. So I think rather than a fairly, other than killing the Jedi and the Separatists, Palpatine manages a fairly bloodless coup.
Mhm.
Anakin plunges the everything right into a bloody consolidation of power almost immediately to
Yes.
seize control. But he manages it. While Yoda, having survived, not having been shamed by his defeat, in warning Obi-Wan, does not think he can also defeat Anakin. And so he goes and rallies the surviving Jedi, um, because formally to protect the children of Skywalker, he does not. He lets the Order 66 survivors manage by themselves so
Mhm.
that he can save the children of Anakin Skywalker, not draw attention to themselves.
Right.
Without that, I think Yoda stays on the move and starts forming a nucleus of Jedi survivors around himself to then try to reforge the Jedi Order. And that's a very dangerous enemy for Anakin to have.
Mhm. And yeah, Yoda is not dealing with the defeat at the hands of Palpatine, which I think was a sort of a killing blow to Yoda's ego and his faith in his own abilities. So he is coming off the back of a enormous victory against Palpatine. So I think that he would not give up. And you're right in that he would work to organize the Jedi and maybe start a rebellion. I'm sure it would fall within his goal to take down the Empire. So I think that we have a horrifying looking um, battle and a horrifying war between the Empire and the Jedi. And it may last long enough for Anakin to raise his children, and you can bet that he would raise them to be um, as powerful and uh, deadly as possible, because if Anakin, I think at this point, cares for anything, it would be his own children.
Yeah, you get a generation of warlike Bakken Jedi raised by Yoda fighting
Hmm.
against the trio of Skywalker Sith in the throne room of Coruscant. Well, Anakin obviously still built the Death Star.
Hmm.
Tarkin might still uh, let it go. Anakin seems more like the fleet type, so he might instead go with Thrawn's plan of having air superiority.
Hmm.
But whatever form his control of the galaxy takes, it is far more brutal than Palpatine managed. And Palpatine hardly had a light hand.
Yeah.
Palpatine put layers of fascist bureaucracy in place to oppress people for him. Anakin is more direct in his repression. He's almost like the First Order. He has a cult of personality with a brutal, direct military dictatorship.
Hmm.
At least Palpatine has the veneer for a while of the Senate and voting and bureaucracy. Anakin does away with that almost immediately,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
he then becomes a Sith military dictator, which is not as effective as what Palpatine did. Palpatine did it that way because he wanted to. So much of Anakin's attention is consumed by just holding everything together, putting out rebellions, quelling uprisings on planets, massacring individuals, galvanizes the Republic against him much earlier, or the rebellion against him much earlier, because Palpatine, it only happened when Palpatine's oppression grew too much. So I think it's a sort of an ongoing state of civil war going on
Hmm.
into the future.
Yes, and it'll probably be bloody and violent, and we're really getting Kylo Ren in the First Order 2 generations before that occurs.
Yeah, except we have the version of the First Order, Anakin's Empire ruling from Coruscant and still having all of the fleets. So I think it just presages a. I think more of the Jedi Order survives because Yoda's there to shepherd them in, and
Hmm.
Yoda is an intelligent and wise strategist, but he has to then start making some difficult decisions. So I think eventually Anakin falls at the hands of Yoda's nucleus of Jedi as his
Hmm.
empire crumbles to pieces. But I'm not sure how there's not a lot of the apparatus of the Empire left. Like the New Republic even comes in, as we see in Ahsoka and the Mandalorian, and sort of just repurposes all of the old Republic era institutions that the Empire had, perverted and tries to restore them to original state. Under Anakin's rule, it's all been destroyed. It has to be built from scrap. I think the galaxy fragments at the end of the war. Yeah, like you said, it's a generation early, because that's what happens at the end of
Hmm.
the Rise of Skywalker, when the New Republic is destroyed, the First Order is destroyed, and we don't know what the galaxy is going to look like.
I can definitely see that uh, if Anakin does have possession of his children, one of his children at least will take up the mantle of ruler of the galaxy, and even after his death, uh, the conflict would continue.
All right, so that's my what if for Revenge of the Sith. What is your what if, Connor, for our final
So,
what if of the episode?
yeah, I wanted to make something a little different and not have Anakin go murderous. So I thought, what if we have Mace Windu and his posse of Jedi overcome Palpatine before Palpatine gets the opportunity to finally twist the knife and turn Anakin to the dark side.
Okay, so if Mace Windu manages to kill Palpatine before he can proclaim Order 66,
Hmm.
that's a big change. I
Yes.
mean, Palpatine loses. He gambles everything on having control of the apparatus of state. He gambles everything on telling Anakin who he is to try to get a powerful apprentice. He thinks he is powerful enough to defeat the one of the two Grand Masters of the Jedi Council, and he loses.
Mhm.
So if Anakin arrives to find Palpatine dead, having told Windu an hour ago that he was a Sith Lord, Anakin might be conflicted, but now he's done the right thing. He told Mace
Mhm.
Windu what was going on. Mace Windu killed Palpatine for it, and then Windu even tells him, "If this is true, you've earned my trust." Anakin is then welcomed into the Jedi as a high-ranking member. Does he keep his relationship secret or not? Does he then have the political will to maybe sort of have a mistress on the side or a wife on the side? Who knows? But I mean, this the Clone Wars then sort of they only went on so long because Palpatine deliberately played both sides against each other.
Hmm.
You still have Dooku is still dead. Ventress is still out there, but there's not really anyone because Obi-Wan still kills Grievous. So
Hmm.
there's that happens, and then Order 66 just doesn't happen. So the Outer Rim sieges are done. So I think the Separatists just crumble to pieces. The Jedi Order has lots of trauma to deal with. Lots of people fall into the dark side. They've become a militarized arm of the Republic. But
Hmm.
all of the ways in which Palpatine started to undermine the government don't happen. They can then be rolled back. They can be changed. Do we think the Jedi are able to claw things back from the brink with the Sith Lord dead? My sense is yes,
Hmm.
because without Palpatine, with Palpatine then clouding the Jedi Council's vision, I think they discover a lot of what he was doing. So I think this is one of the biggest linchpins we've discovered as far as where it radically alters the trajectory of everything that comes after.
I agree. And I think that the question is the damage damning enough to the point where Anakin is still going to turn to the dark side, or is he galvanized by the fact that he has done the right thing? Does that cause him to break things off with Padme? Does that cause him to maybe walk away from the Jedi Order, seeing that, you know what, I've gained some hubris and this, war has changed me and this thing that I've wanted all my life. Uh, it's not so much to be a Jedi, but it's to have family. It's to have love, to have support, to have structure. So do we get something similar to what you suggested, where Obi-Wan would walk away from the Order? Does Anakin allow himself to do that? So I think we have a lot of potential in order to grasp at uh, what path Anakin takes,
But
and
Anakin is
from
then
there, does the First Order still return?
Anakin is then given options. He actually has
Mhm.
choices. Um, he can leave the Jedi. He can leave the Jedi Order. He can stay. Maybe he becomes a general in the Grand Army of the Republic without being a Jedi. Maybe he
Mhm.
becomes consort to the Senator of Naboo. Whatever he has choices, and he's now earned the trust of I think Mace Windu enough. He could confess a secret relationship, receive
Mhm.
dispensation, or be given a choice. It's like, okay, you married and had children. That's bad, but you also revealed a Sith Lord. Do the strict does the order manage to realize that perhaps they should need to reform their vision that has been clouded for 40 years by a Sith
Mhm.
Lord is lifted? Do they then does their the sort of the strict dogmatic narrowed vision thing that Palpatine had been guiding them towards then allow them to reform and avoid the fate of Order 66? But there are options. You can see
Mhm.
many different branches of the future going forward. So I think that remains a very positive future because then the villain doesn't win. Palpatine wins at the end of Revenge of the Sith. If he doesn't win, I can see things being much more hopeful.
Mhm.
I think Padme then survives, has their children. I Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, the Clone Wars ends as a enormous galactic civil war, but the Separatists are largely reintegrated back into the Republic, signed peace treaties, many of which are punitive, but you have the calming voices of Bail Organa and the Jedi Order and Padme Amidala there to guide the galaxy back to a peaceful place. So, as far as Palpatine's plans, so we know he had been pursuing Operation Necromancer to get immortality for himself.
Mhm.
He already had cultists on the planet of Exegol, but he had not yet had the resources in hand to really dig his teeth into what was going on. Um,
And we still have Grogu at the Jedi Temple.
yeah.
So there's
So
no gaining his magical DNA to make a Force sensitive clone.
yeah, and for those who have watched the Bad Batch, we get even more about the cloning, the how Palpatine immediately uses his greater authority as Emperor to fast track his cloning program.
Hmm.
So maybe his spirit survives, and it takes. But I think he then becomes like any other Sith Lord, a shadow bound to an object or a place, unable to
Hmm.
project his power. I don't see the final order or the First Order happening. There will be other conflicts, other things will arise. Ventress is still out there. If Palpatine is dead, Maul, without Order 66, Maul remains in the captivity of the Grand Army of the Republic. I
Hmm.
think he's probably tried and either executed or put in prison forever. He could emerge as a villain again, but he had told Ahsoka about Palpatine, so I think if Ahsoka then testifies to that, who knows what happens with Maul? But
Mhm.
without the rise of the Empire, the galaxy is almost unrecognizable.
Yeah, we have no Snoke. We have no. I mean, arguably, there's Thrawn. Thrawn's out there and could cause some trouble, but he's, one, we have not seen what Thrawn is capable of post Return of the Jedi, and two, he's still without so many resources and so many. Uh, there's no birth of the Empire for him to pull resources
Yeah,
from.
Thrawn didn't join the Empire till it was a few years old. So I think he goes on his mission. He comes and talks to maybe Chancellor Amidala and just talks about that, makes an alliance perhaps with the Republic. But I don't think he doesn't respect the military prowess of the Grand Army of the Republic in the same way that he decides needs to use the Empire. So I think he returns to the Chiss Ascendancy, and Thrawn never had any particular interest in conquering something else. He just integrated himself into an existing power structure. So in
Mhm.
this galaxy, Thrawn makes the calculated decision that I'm just going to go back home. There's nothing for me here. Too many Jedi around. I don't trust them. I'm going to leave.
And he's not going to be returning with the Chiss Ascendancy either,
The
just
Chiss never
because, yeah,
wanted to
he has no power. Yeah.
the Chiss are not nearly powerful enough. They wanted a stronger ally to help against their own enemy, the Grisk. So maybe there's an alliance that happens or a technology exchange, but Thrawn does not have the opportunity to take control of part of the Empire to point at his enemies. He pursues other aims. His
Mhm.
original plan had been to be gone for less than a year from the Chiss Ascendancy. Being in the Empire for 30 years was not his original strategy.
So yeah, I mean, unless the fact that Mandalore is kept intact and they become some threatening force in the galaxy, but even they're neutral. I think we've landed on an alternate future that's actually 100% improved upon what happened in the past. I would
Yeah,
love if Anakin took a page from Ahsoka's book and said, you know, I'm big enough to realize that I can't have everything, and I want my family more. We don't have a dark future for that Anakin Skywalker.
yeah. Yeah, so that is, I think that encapsulates it. I think that is perhaps the biggest linchpin we've talked about in our episodes so far, where it makes the future almost unrecognizable. And it would be
Mhm.
it's an interesting galaxy to think about because it basically is Palpatine failed, and he failed even before he had his future contingency if I fail plan in place. No Operation Cinder, no Operation Necromancer, no
Mhm.
evil clone, no Snoke, no anything. It's just so Rey is never born because Palpatine never has, never traps a clone of himself to have children on Exegol. So it's just there's no First Order to kidnap Finn, who then probably grows up as a in a normal life in whatever planet he was abducted from. The Damerons never meet because they were part of the Rebel Alliance. So Poe Dameron is never born.
Mhm.
So our whole sequel trilogy just vanishes, as does most of the events of the original trilogy. So this single event removes the setup and play out of the entire remaining six movies because
Mhm.
none of this, Han Solo leaves the joins the Grand Army of the Republic to escape Corellia, and instead of being cashiered out, is instead becomes a successful pilot.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, just a
yeah,
registered, clean cut above the law pilot. So
yeah,
yeah, this is a potential where Anakin kind of is a more straightforward chosen one who brings balance to the galaxy. So yeah, I think that's definitely the most striking change. Usually, when altering something in one of these movies, it's going to follow a similar course, but yeah, this is quite the exception. So yeah, any other thoughts as far as alternatives for the prequels, so their prequel trilogy goes?
I think that about takes it through. As you can see, the changes made in these movies ripple throughout every single other film. So I think they are the most significant. But I find it telling that most of the changes that we made, except for the last one, still had things sort of falling into place. It takes a dramatic break of Palpatine losing to have Anakin not become his apprentice.
Mhm.
So, that was the only what if we talked about where Palpatine lost. All the other
Right.
ones, or both Anakin and Palpatine, and it was before Anakin had fallen. The other one
Mhm.
where Palpatine lost to Yoda, Anakin was already on his dark trajectory. So only by removing Palpatine before he has corrupted Anakin Skywalker do we arrive at a galaxy that is improved.
That definitely feels like the case here. There's very little doubt as far as what else could threaten the galaxy.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for What If Episode 2 about the prequel trilogy. Join us next week for our conclusion to our original What If episodes about the sequel trilogy. We hope you enjoyed this take. If you would like to discuss our thoughts, visit our subreddit at www.reddit.com/r/talking Star Wars.
Yeah, let us know if you have any alternate ideas or some future scenarios that you'd like to see in the upcoming What If Star Wars show that I'm not sure is actually coming out, but they at least there's rumors of it.
We'll do our own version here. It's always interesting to think through the implications of how small changes can ripple throughout a setting as intricate and detailed as Star Wars.
Mhm.
All right, till next time, Star Wars fans.
We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.